You don't belong in the VIP lounge. Raymond, a $500 a plate opening isn't meant for a guy who smells like Freon and sweat. The words cut through the elegant hum of the newly opened restaurant like a dropped champagne glass. Julian Vance, the celebrity chef and face of the Obsidian Room, stood blocking the entrance to the private dining area. His tailored suit was immaculate, his smile sharp and condescending. Beside him, his PR manager, Chloe, held a clipboard, her eyes scanning Raymond's worn flannel shirt and steel-toed boots with undisguised distaste. Raymond Whitaker did not flinch. He stood quietly, holding the hand of his 12-year-old daughter, Lily. She had worn her favorite floral dress for this special night. Excited to see the place her father had helped build, now, she shrank slightly behind him, sensing the hostility. "You're ruining the aesthetic for the investors," Julian added, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper. "There's a side table near the kitchen doors. Go sit there, have a free burger, and leave before the press arrives. Consider it a favor for fixing the pipes." Raymond looked at Julian the way a carpenter looks at a termite-infested beam. He didn't raise his voice, nor did he argue. He simply registered the disrespect. "If you enjoy stories where vulnerable people are humiliated but turn the tables in unexpected ways, subscribe now. We share a new story every day. We were invited." "Julian," Raymond said evenly, his voice barely above a murmur, "you sent the gold foil envelope yourself." "That was a formality for the vendors," Chloe interjected, rolling her eyes. "It wasn't an actual expectation that the maintenance crew would show up in work gear." Raymond looked down at Lily. Her excitement had vanished, replaced by a quiet embarrassment that made Raymond's chest tighten. He had spent 8 months breathing life into this building, working late into the night while Julian posed for magazines. He didn't need a fancy dinner, but he would not let his daughter be treated like a nuisance. "Let's go, Lily," Raymond said softly. "The food near the kitchen is always cold anyway." Julian smirked, adjusting his cuffs, satisfied that the blue-collar worker knew his place. But as Raymond turned to walk toward the exit, he didn't head for the kitchen. He stopped at a small, discreet digital panel mounted on the hallway wall. He typed in a 6-digit code, tapped the screen twice, and walked out the front doors into the cool evening air. He hadn't yelled, but he had just started the clock. The street outside the Obsidian Room was lined with luxury cars. A stark contrast to Raymond's heavy-duty work truck parked down the block. He opened the passenger door for Lily, making sure she was buckled in before walking around to the driver's side. The silence in the cab was heavy. "Are we really leaving?" Dad, Lily asked, her voice small. "I thought you owned part of that place." "I do, sweetheart," Raymond replied, starting the engine. "But sometimes people forget who built the floor they're standing on. We just need to give them a little reminder." Instead of going home to brood, Raymond drove them to a classic downtown diner. They ordered milkshakes and double cheeseburgers. While Lily dug into her fries, Raymond pulled out his company tablet. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was the founder of Whitaker Climate and Infrastructure, a highly specialized commercial engineering firm. He wore flannel because he liked being in the field, not because he couldn't afford a suit. He opened the management portal for the Obsidian Room. The entire restaurant, from the ambient dining room temperature to the hypersensitive dry aging meat lockers and the $1 million wine cellar, ran on his proprietary software. He had given Julian administrative access as a courtesy, a gesture of goodwill to a business partner. That courtesy was now revoked. With a few calm taps, Raymond downgraded Julian's digital permissions from owner to basic staff. He then disabled the automatic emergency override for the cooling systems. If anything fluctuated, Julian wouldn't be able to fix it with a button press. He would have to call the system administrator. "Is everything okay?" Dad, Lily asked, noticing his focused expression. "Everything is perfectly fine." Raymond smiled, closing the tablet and taking a sip of his milkshake. "Just updating some boundaries?" He didn't need to ruin Julian's grand opening tonight. He just needed to step back and let the man realize exactly what holding the VIP section actually cost him. Without Raymond's silent support, the glittering facade of Julian's empire was just glass waiting to crack. The true test wouldn't be tonight. It would be tomorrow, when Julian realized who actually held the keys. To understand Julian's arrogance, one had to look back 8 months. Back then, Julian wasn't a polished celebrity chef. He was a desperate man sitting in a dusty construction site, staring at a notice of default. His initial investors had pulled out, realizing Julian was better at spending money on marketing than managing a construction budget. Raymond had been hired simply to install the commercial HVAC, but when the project stalled, Julian had practically begged him for help. Raymond, a single father who had built his business from nothing, had a soft spot for ambitious underdogs. He saw potential in the restaurant's concept. So, Raymond made a quiet decision. He fronted $125,000 as a bridge loan to cover the construction deficit. A few weeks later, when the budget for the kitchen's custom refrigeration ran dry, Raymond installed the $42,000 specialized units on a handshake and a deferred invoice. But the most critical piece of leverage wasn't the money, because Julian's credit was temporarily frozen by his previous investors. The master commercial lease and the city health permits were registered under Raymond's LLC. Raymond was legally the master tenant of the property. Julian was, on paper, just a sublessee operating under Raymond's umbrella until the debts were cleared. As the restaurant neared completion, Chloe, the PR manager, entered the picture. She began crafting a narrative of Julian as a lone genius who built his culinary temple against all odds. Raymond was slowly pushed into the background, reduced in their eyes to the Freon guy. Julian stopped returning Raymond's calls about the repayment schedule, assuming the blue-collar contractor was too intimidated by Julian's new wealthy circle to demand his money. Raymond hadn't pushed it. He was a patient man. He believed people showed their true character when they finally got a taste of power. Tonight, Julian had shown exactly who he was. Sitting in the diner, Raymond looked at the 3 documents stored safely in his digital archive: the $125,000 loan agreement, the $42,000 unpaid invoice, and the master permit. Julian had built a castle, but he had conveniently forgotten that Raymond owned the land beneath it. At 900 a.m. the next morning, Raymond was under the hood of a client's industrial freezer when his phone buzzed. It was Julian's assistant, her voice tight with panic. "Raymond, we have a massive glitch at the restaurant. The temperature in the dry aging room is rising, and the wine cellar just threw an error code. Julian needs you here immediately." Raymond calmly wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm afraid I can't do that. Sarah, my complimentary maintenance period ended last night." Within seconds, the line clicked, and Julian's voice barked through the speaker. "Listen to me, Whitaker. The VIP press dinner is tomorrow night. No, I have investors coming from New York. Fix this system right now, or I'll drag your name through the mud in this city. You'll never pipe another kitchen again." Raymond didn't raise his voice. He leaned against his truck, watching the morning traffic roll by. "Julian, you seem to have a misunderstanding of our professional relationship. If you want emergency service, my premium rate is $350 an hour." "Fine, bill me," Julian snapped. "I can't do that," Raymond replied smoothly. "Company policy requires all past due balances to be cleared before new work orders are initiated. You currently have an outstanding balance of $167. There was a heavy pause on the line. Julian's bravado faltered for a second before his ego took over. "You're trying to extort me over a few missed payments. I'm the owner of the Obsidian Room. I'll just hire another firm to hack your cheap software. You're welcome to try. Julian, have a good day." Raymond hung up. He knew Julian wouldn't be able to bypass the system. The software was custom built by Raymond's engineers, encrypted and physically linked to the hardware. Any attempt to force a reboot without the master admin code would automatically trigger a safety lockdown, dropping the temperature of the wine cellar to 0 degrees to preserve the assets, which would essentially freeze and destroy Julian's delicate $100,000 vintage wine collection. Raymond wasn't holding the restaurant hostage. He was simply letting the natural consequences of Julian's arrogance take their course. By early afternoon, the situation inside the Obsidian Room was growing tense. Chloe paced the main dining room, scrolling aggressively through her phone. She had spent the morning posting perfectly edited photos of the opening night, carefully cropping out anyone who didn't fit the luxury aesthetic, especially Raymond. The narrative was set. Julian was a solo visionary. But behind the kitchen doors, Julian was sweating. 2 different tech companies had already arrived, looked at the custom refrigeration control panels, and immediately walked away. They told Julian the same thing: the system was proprietary, and trying to force it would trigger a lockdown. "Just pay the plumber his money." "Julian," Chloe hissed, noticing the rising temperature on the digital thermometer outside the dry aging room. "If that meat spoils before the New York investors taste it, we lose the $2 million expansion funding." I don't have $167,000 in cash right now, Julian shot back, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. It's tied up in marketing and decor. He knows that. He's just a greasy mechanic trying to flex on his betters. I'm not going to let a guy who wears dirty boots dictate how I run my empire. Julian decided on a different tactic. He knew Raymond was a quiet man, someone who usually avoided confrontation. Julian figured if he put enough pressure on him, Raymond would fold. Julian pulled out a document his lawyers had drafted weeks ago but that he hadn't dared present yet. It was a revised operating agreement, burying Raymond's initial investment as a sunk cost and converting his debt into a non-voting, fractional equity share that would take decades to pay out. "Call him," Julian ordered his assistant. "Tell him the city inspector is demanding a signature on the final health addendum before tomorrow's press event. He's the master leaseholder on paper, so he has to sign it. When he gets here, I'll handle the rest." Julian smiled, convincing himself he was back in control. He would use the signature as leverage. If Raymond didn't unlock the system, Julian would threaten to report him to the licensing board for abandoning a critical infrastructure project. Raymond arrived at the Obsidian Room at 4:00 p.m. He didn't bother using the VIP entrance. He walked right through the loading dock, wearing the same flannel shirt and work boots from the night before. The kitchen staff, who actually respected Raymond because he had spent months working alongside them, gave him quiet nods of acknowledgement. Julian was waiting in the main dining room, sitting at a long marble table with Chloe. The room was empty of customers, the silence amplifying the tension. "Nice of you to show up, Raymond," Julian said, sliding a thick folder across the marble. "Sign the city addendum, and while you're at it, sign the revised operating agreement. It restructures your debt into equity. Do this, unlock my coolers, and maybe I'll forget how unprofessional you've been." Raymond didn't sit down. He didn't even reach for the folder. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Julian's nervous energy. "I told you my terms on the phone. Julian, the balance needs to be cleared. You're a glorified handyman," Julian suddenly exploded, slamming his hand on the table. "You think you can walk into a place like this and make demands? Look at you. You don't even belong in this zip code. If you don't sign that paper, I will personally ensure your little HVAC company is blacklisted by every major developer in the state." Raymond observed Julian the way one observes a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. He didn't feel angry. He felt a profound sense of clarity. For months, he had given Julian the benefit of the doubt, assuming the stress of the business was making him act poorly. But some people only respect the boundaries that are enforced with iron. "I won't be signing your new agreement, Julian," Raymond said, his voice flat and steady. "And I won't be signing the city addendum either, not until we resolve the reality of this situation." Raymond reached into his worn leather satchel and pulled out a plain manila envelope. He placed it gently on top of Julian's fancy legal folder. Julian stared at the manila envelope as if it were a bomb. Chloe shifted nervously in her chair, her PR instincts telling her that the dynamic in the room had just violently shifted. "What is this?" Julian sneered. Refusing to touch it, Raymond opened the envelope himself. He didn't make a grand speech. He simply laid out 3 pieces of paper, sliding them one by one across the marble surface. "This is the $125,000 bridge loan you signed when your initial backers walked out," Raymond said quietly. He placed the first paper down. "You are 60 days in default." He slid the second paper next to it. "This is the invoice for the $42,000 custom refrigeration system. The equipment currently keeping your meat from rotting. Title of ownership remains with Whitaker Climate until paid in full." Finally, he placed the third paper down. It was a single, heavily stamped sheet from the city, and this is the master lease and health permit issued to Whitaker LLC because, as you might recall, your credit was too toxic to pass the city's background check. Julian's face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so quickly he looked ill. He instinctively reached out to grab the papers, but Raymond placed his heavy, calloused hand flat over them. "Those are copies, Julian," Raymond noted softly. "The originals are in a safety deposit box." "You can't do this," Julian hissed, his voice dropping its arrogant edge, replaced by genuine panic. "The New York investors are coming tomorrow. If they see this, they'll pull the expansion funding. I'll be ruined." "You ruined yourself," Raymond replied. "You stood in this exact room yesterday and told my daughter and me that we didn't belong here. You treated me like dirt to inflate your own ego." You wanted to be the sole owner of this empire. Julian, now, you get to deal with the consequences. Raymond picked up the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and turned toward the door. Wait, Chloe yelled, stepping forward. What do you want? We can write you a check for a portion right now. I want the full balance transferred by noon tomorrow, Raymond said without looking back. Or I walk into that press dinner, and I show the investors exactly who owns the Obsidian Room. The next evening, the Obsidian Room was packed. Soft jazz played over the hidden speakers, and the lighting was perfectly dimmed. Julian was working the room, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with the wealthy New York investors who were poised to hand him $2 million for a franchise expansion. But beneath the tailored suit, Julian was a wreck. He hadn't transferred the money. He didn't have it. He had spent the entire day trying to secure a predatory short-term loan, but had failed. He was banking on the hope that Raymond was just making empty threats, that the blue-collar mechanic wouldn't actually have the nerve to ruin a high-society event. At 7:30 p.m., Julian stepped up to a small microphone near the bar to give his welcome speech. He spoke about vision, about building things from the ground up, about sweat equity. He called himself the sole architect of the restaurant's success. Near the back of the room, standing near the coat check, was Raymond. He wasn't wearing flannel today. He wore a simple, dark, well-fitted suit. He looked comfortable, grounded, and entirely immovable. As Julian finished his speech to a round of applause, the lead New York investor, a sharp-eyed woman named Eleanor, raised her glass. Julian, it's a beautiful space. But before we sign the expansion checks, I want to confirm the infrastructure. We heard a rumor about some permitting issues regarding the master lease. Julian froze. He forced a smile. Just administrative delays. Eleanor, nothing to worry about. My contractors handled it. Raymond stepped forward from the shadows. The crowd parted slightly, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Actually, Julian, Raymond's voice carried through the quiet room. Deep and unbothered. The master lease isn't delayed. It's simply not yours. Julian gripped the microphone, his knuckles turning white. Security, he hissed into the mic. Remove this disgruntled vendor. Nobody moved. Raymond walked slowly toward the front, pulling the manila envelope from his jacket. There are 3 numbers the investors should know before they write you a check. Julian, Eleanor, the lead investor, stepped in front of the security guard who had hesitantly started walking toward Raymond. Hold on, she said, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Raymond. Who are you? My name is Raymond Whitaker, he said smoothly. I own Whitaker Climate and Infrastructure, and, legally speaking, I am the master tenant of this property. A murmur rippled through the crowd of journalists, food critics, and financiers. Chloe covered her face with her hands, knowing it was over. Julian tried to laugh it off. A dry, desperate sound. He's a plumber. Eleanor, he's just upset because we disputed a faulty invoice. Raymond didn't argue. He simply handed the manila envelope to Eleanor. $125,000 in defaulted bridge loans, $42,000 in unpaid, unsecured equipment, and the master permit. Registered under my LLC, Julian doesn't own this restaurant. He is a subtenant in severe breach of contract. Eleanor opened the envelope. She was a woman who dealt in facts, not PR narratives. It took her less than 30 seconds to read the highlighted clauses. She looked up, her expression turning to ice as she glared at Julian. You told us you owned the lease outright, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the silent room. You told us your initial capital was self-funded. I can explain, Julian stammered. Stepping away from the microphone, he's twisting the facts. He's trying to steal my brand. He doesn't have to steal anything, Eleanor replied coldly, handing the papers back to Raymond. He already owns the ground you're standing on. We are pulling our term sheet. Julian, I don't do business with men who lie on their financials. The collapse was instantaneous. The other investors began murmuring, shaking their heads, and setting their drinks down. The journalists in the room immediately started typing on their phones. Julian stood on the small stage, entirely isolated. He looked at Raymond, expecting to see a smug grin of victory. But Raymond wasn't smiling. He just looked at Julian with quiet indifference. Raymond hadn't needed to shout, throw a punch and stay zaggiest or cause a scene. He had simply let the truth do the heavy lifting. The fallout was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, Julian's expansion deal was officially dead. Faced with the reality of eviction and lawsuits, Julian's remaining backers forced a restructuring. Julian was stripped of his managing partner title. He wasn't kicked out of the kitchen, but he was reduced to exactly what he was when employee on a salary, answering to a new board. As for Raymond, the new board immediately cleared his $167,000 balance to avoid losing the lease and the critical refrigeration infrastructure. They even offered Raymond a permanent seat on the board, offering him a slice of the profits. Raymond declined. He transferred the master lease over to the new board, took his money, and severed all ties with the Obsidian Room. He didn't want to be in the restaurant business. He just wanted what he was owed, and he wanted his dignity respected. He had established his boundary, and the message was received loud and clear. A week later, Raymond took Lily out for dinner. They didn't go to a $500 a plate VIP room. They went to a lively, family-owned Italian place in their neighborhood, where the owner greeted Raymond by name and brought them a free plate of garlic bread. "Did you fix their pipes too?" Dad Lily joked, taking a massive bite of the bread. "No," Raymond smiled, leaning back in the comfortable booth. "I just helped them out a long time ago. They remembered." He looked at his daughter, feeling a profound sense of lightness. He didn't need to wear a fancy suit or stand behind velvet ropes to know his worth. He knew exactly who he was, and no arrogant chef could ever take that away. He had protected his business, secured his future, and shown his daughter that you never have to accept disrespect, no matter how much money the person insulting you has in the bank. If you enjoy stories where underestimated people turn the tables, subscribe now. We share a new emotional story with an unexpected twist every day. Do you think Raymond made the right decision by walking away entirely? Tell us what you would have done in the comments. Thank you for watching until the very end. Subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next story.